while. But maybe it's not. Maybe people are ready for wine or something. But really what it is we have usually a discussion session at the end where we've heard a lot, and it said, oh, if I had only known that, I would have asked so-and-so this question. So it gives you a chance to, we just provide a chance for you to ask anyone, but particularly some of the speakers that, I had thought of, he just asked a question. I was wondering about how that fits in with what you were saying. So let's open up. Bill, you've got a question you'd like to ask someone?
My head is kind of solid, but maybe with Jar Luce and after somebody else.
All right. Who wants to start off with a question or something like that? Brian? Who would you like to ask a question?
I don't want to answer.
You don't want to ask a question of anyone? God, this is a bunch of deadheads.
Well, all right.
Go ahead. Good.
I'll ask Luce the question. I mean, the quantum mechanics people were driven by something to do what they did. I mean, they must have been extraordinarily excited about the evolution of those ideas and why they needed those and how they fit into physics. And I'm just wondering whether you're being driven by the same excitement and force in trying to come up with this representation of a bunch of psychology experiments.
Unfortunately not. Jennifer talked about, but I think the original passion of Jerome Lucemeyer was that he was also not only describing in a different way what people were doing and how to handle data from a different point of view, but he was also talking about processes that happen. So he thought he was going to be able to capture by this a formal model of cognitive dissonance, of interference theory and memory, and things like that.
Yeah.
That he was going to give mechanisms that would give rise. My understanding of what Jennifer is doing is not saying, in the way that Wismeyer wanted to do it, was using ideas like our quantum mechanics, mechanisms out of like in quantum mechanics. Jennifer is just using the formalism of quantum mechanics, the logic, not any of the mechanisms, and getting psychological mechanisms or different mechanisms from explaining it, having it, I think, being more clearly articulated in that framework than in the standard framework. But their passion is that they can accomplish something. One case
that's a passion.
One case is, I'm just trying to figure out what they're doing from a
Okay.
different point of view.
I want to hear Jennifer's defense of herself. Any comments on Jennifer?
I would agree with most of that. I mean, so I am just using the probability theory and the logic, and I'm not attaching any of the physics to that. So what I really want to see now is how to take my experiments and put them into Lewis's framework. So for me, there's still a disconnect in exactly how to reformulate my sort of Hilbert space interpretation into something that's a bit more algebraic. Because at that point, then I can start to say, okay, well, now we've really moved away from that quantum mechanics sort of framework and moved it into something that is really looks more general.
Yeah, Jeff, one thing Jeff did is implicitly, a lot of his criticisms have the following form. Jennifer does something, and he says, look, it doesn't make sense in quantum mechanics.
It doesn't matter.
And so what he's thinking of is that if Jennifer's doing a generalization of quantum mechanics should be one of the areas that it applies to. And it doesn't. I mean, because quantum mechanics is what she is doing plus more.
Let me say something, because Jeff isn't here.
Yeah.
So what Jeff said is, if you want to embed quantum mechanics in a classical probability setting, it's obvious you can do so. Right?
Yes.
Because there's the bone-hidden variable theory, right? And it's not local, all right, but you don't care about locality. You just want to embed it in classical probability space, and you can do it, right? Now, you'd have to say the same thing, right? Wouldn't you? You have all your counterfacts.
Oh, yeah.
There's a big Boolean algebra. If everything were determinable about the counterfacts, you'd have a big probability space. But you're saying, well, but you know, some of that stuff's not well defined, so I shrink it down.
I would say that Jeff.
No, what would you say? That's the question. How would Jeff say?
What would you say?
Well, I have added some other assumptions that's kind of hidden in the nature of psychological experimentation. So I have specialized it in such a way it doesn't apply to quantum experimentation. And so
But you could embed everything in a big probability space.
it is embedded in it.
Yeah,
It is.
okay.
The counterfactual probability space is a big classical probability space.
But you do not need any counterfactuals for that either. I mean, you can do it in a variety of different ways.
Yes.
You know, but embeddability is not a well-defined concept in the following sense. You can embed quantum mechanics into classical mechanics without any problems, in the sense that everything done or asserted in quantum mechanics will be compatible with the laws of classical mechanics. The other problem is whether you can constrain in some way the classical mechanics so that it will be compatible with quantum mechanics and with nothing else. That becomes a tricky question.
Yeah.
But it's extremely easy to construct a large probability space with well-defined random variables that will be compatible with absolutely anything, not only with quantum mechanics, but anything imaginable. Whatever will happen with these random variables will be perfectly expressible in terms of Kolmogorov's probability theorem. It can be even proved as a theorem. There is, among all couplings, there is so-called independent coupling. When all the things that do not come together, you declare them different random variables and simply put them together as independent. Right? It's one way of doing it. But it's totally empty in the sense that it doesn't lead it, that's the way. Or another way of doing it, so-called conditionalization. Imagine some random variable in the background, conditioned upon the values of which, the things that we observe happen. And then consider, the joint distribution will be perfectly Kolmogorovian. Again, absolutely empty from the point of view of any kind of insights with respect to what's going on there, right? So this embeddability is a difficult proposition in that sense.
Comments, anybody else? No, you, not ready. Jennifer, you want to go last?
Don't really have another comment.
You don't have any?
Can I ask you a question about your talk?
Oh,
So, can you speculate, because on the color stuff, where you had your discontinuity, your suggestion was that, it pops out into another dimension, right?
no, that's one possibility.
Oh, okay.
That's one possibility. You can do it without it popping in another one. And really, in answer to some of those, what we do is we have a lot of local theories.
Yeah.
So suppose I have an object like this. But suppose I have a local theory where I'm going to piece it together on the edges. All the way around, and it's continuous all the way around. That's the same thing as this problem right here. That's precisely the same thing as this problem right here. And so what happens is if you get a discontinuity, you get either one way of getting a discontinuity. Bill was talking about it in terms of higher dimensions in catastrophe theory. One way is jumping up, and that's what Luce and I have talked about that once or twice. But the discontinuities, I want to get the discontinuities just strictly in this setting right here, if I can get in this setting. And indeed, when and they're big discontinuities, and you have to get a couple of them actually. What's happening is these lines right here are starting to pop off here. So this continuity, and they keep popping off, and you keep getting a lot
So
of
the dimensionality of the solution doesn't change, it's just, yeah.
I'm doing it with the same dimension. But if you do higher dimensionality, you can get it 2 dimensions, with what Bill's raising at the coffee. Yes?
I'm still going around in circles on your
Well, we're
talk.
not circles.
But let me just give a free association about some things that you brought up, and it explains why quantum theory was so difficult to arrive at for humans. And that is that the example you showed on the split face, that there was no ambiguity in anybody's answer. I answered one way and Kimberly answered another way. That's a very, very general aspect of the whole visual system in general. It is instructed or evolved never to give us any ambiguity about what's going on. It makes the decision, like on the Necker cube, you cannot see it both ways. It's one way or the other, depending on the context, but in general, the visual system will give you an answer. And we're very clever at thinking up illusions and other kinds of things that change and switch. But the main thing is that in evolution, the visual system didn't want to make any ambiguity about whether something was coming or going, or whether it was alive or dead in Schrodinger's cat and so forth. And it made the appearance of ambiguity in the initial arriving at the quantum theory really tough for humans to wrap their heads around. That's back to the final circle.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. You had a comment? No, guess not. Okay, everyone. Well, I want to thank all the speakers for wonderful talks.